I'd love you to give me some insight into the strategy that they're running here, because it seems like this is unlike any presidential transition I've ever seen. They seem to be coming right out of the gate really, really hard. And from where I'm sitting, it seems like they're very much determined to give their supporters what they voted for, number one. But number two, they don't want to waste a second. Is it true that they've actually had this transition process running kind of in the background for some time now in preparation for what turned out to be a landslide win?
A little bit, and everyone does some preparation, whether they admit it or not. It's actually been surprisingly lean. If you go back to Hillary Clinton's losing campaign in 2016, she had, everyone figured out, the secretary, undersecretary, assistant secretary, deputy assistant secretary, who was going to go in since they just knew they were going to win. Trump's team partly came over from the America First Policy Institute, a nonprofit that had a lot of his brain trust within it, and a couple people quietly working at Mar-a-Lago. It's a very small team. I mean, it's like the Manhattan Project, except without the Soviet spies. All of these news sources on the left in the U.S., CNN, Bloomberg, that has say that the NBC, that they have sources and that they have information. They do not. They've been just as surprised as the rest of us as some of these nominees. And yeah, Pete Hegseth going to the Defense Department, that was a bit of a stunner, but I think it shows Trump's determination to have just a very strong break with these agencies that failed him in his first term.
Well, I got to say, I'm a big supporter of Hegseth. I think he's a great nominee, and he's said some really, really fascinating things. I think about the way, the defense industry and the way defense procurement particularly is run in the United States. But I want to ask you, too, about two other nominations. Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence and Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. Now, this is really fascinating to me because they're both really interesting picks. Tulsi Gabbard, of course, is very much, an isolationist. She's anti-neocon, forever wars and all of that. Marco Rubio, however, takes far more hawkish positions, I think you could say, on China and the Middle East and a number of issues. How is it going to work having people with these very different views, in the foreign policy and intelligence space in this administration?
Well, Trump is actually very comfortable with dissenting views, and it's unclear whether he's going to run formal National Security Council meetings where all of the members, the ex officio members like the Secretary of Defense and State, and the invited members like the Director of National Intelligence or CIA Director, or if it's just more informal. But if you go back to his first term, you had hawks like Robert O'Brien and Mike Pompeo. Pompeo was the Secretary of State. They wanted to do things to China that the Secretary of the Treasury, Mnuchin, did not want to do, because he was hoping for better trade relations. So Trump was perfectly willing to have that dissent and make decisions, and he doesn't mind that. And that's a hallmark, I think, of good presidents. A problem in the Bush administration where decisions were not actually being elevated up to President Bush. And also on those two, Rubio sort of started out more neoconservative, but has become a little closer to Trump. He voted against the last Ukraine aid package. Same with Gabbard. I mean, she was actually in the military. I think she realizes that the $80 billion a year we pay for our intelligence bureaucracy is not a good deal. We're not getting our money's worth.
And hey, finally, before I let you go, Christian, how excited are we about Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy being tasked with government cost cutting? And I think they're calling it the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Is this going to do what people like me have always wanted somebody to do and come through with a machete on some of those federal bureaucracies?
I hope so, and I think it will work, but it's an uphill battle. We now have an annual budget of $7 trillion, and $2 trillion of that is debt, and there's not a national emergency. So I think you could actually cut government without touching Social Security, Medicare, or pensions for old people, or necessarily the military, or maybe you cut the military somewhat, but not procurement, or try and reform procurement. But, in the old days, you couldn't do cuts because it was taking money away from seniors and kids and things like that. Now there might actually be enough fat. The problem is how you do it. And in the past, when you've put businessmen in charge of government to try and make it work, it doesn't work. So these two might be different. And the fact that they have their president behind them, it's not just some blue ribbon commission, might make the difference this time.
Well, here's hoping. Christian Whiton, thanks so much for your time here on the U.S. Report.